a pleasant suburb outside Vancouver, Washington. A desperate text sent by young children.
And they sent you a text message that said help and that mom and dad were fighting?
They said help, help, help. They're fighting. And we're scared. We're scared.
Days later, and Mom, Tiffany Hill, was at a school event when she got a phone call about her estranged husband, Keland.
She looked like a ghost. She said, I have to go meet my social worker. He tried to buy a gun.
He went to Walmart and tried to purchase a bolt-action rifle to take care of a varmint inside his home.
For weeks, Keland Hill stalked his wife.
We were pressing the officer to check the car. There's no way that he would have known she was here unless he was tracking her.
How long could Tiffany Hill keep running from Keland?
Tiffany always said, the only way I'm going to get out of this is if he kills me.
He was a terrorist. He terrorized her.
They had met whilst serving in the Marines. Was one trained killer about to target another? His wife. When the Hill family moved to the city of Vancouver in Washington state in 2016, they shared little about their former life with their new friends. Tiffany and husband Keland, ex-Marines, trained to fight, to kill, with a domestic history of violence too.
Once his rage with the marriage started kind of like getting out of hand, that's when he started becoming more physical.
The neighbourhood of Sifton to the northwest of Vancouver offered a new start for Keland and Tiffany Hill, who kept their troubled secret past to themselves.
Tiffany was very closed off. She didn't share herself with anybody.
But as Tiffany's friendship blossomed with fellow mum Karina Knight, she began to open up about her 8-year marriage.
Before they really knew each other, she didn't like him at all. She thought he was cocky. He was always flirting with everybody. And, you know, she's a New Yorker, you know. She's from Brooklyn. She didn't do that. She's very smart.
Tiffany and Keland had been deployed to Iraq. She was his commanding officer.
They would work like 24-hour shifts, and it just blossomed. It was very short, you know, that it happened, and all of a sudden they started dating. And I think it was they couldn't live together when they were going to be coming back over here, so they kind of rushed to get married. That way they could live together right away.
In 2008, she sustains an injury and is forced to retire from the military. She retires as a sergeant.
The closer they got, the more Tiffany's friends learned about how troubled her marriage to Keland actually was.
I had asked her, at any point in your marriage were you happy? And she said, at the very beginning, but, you know, we met in the military and I didn't really want to date him and he wore me down. And that was another huge red flag to me.
Criminologist Dr. Brian Frederick researches intimate partner violence. He also sees the way Tiffany and Keland's relationship began as a red flag.
One of the first things that these perpetrators will do is to gain the trust of their future victim. And one way they do that is by, maybe sending them, repeated texts during the day. Oh, I love you. Oh, you're the person, you're the person for me.
I went through Tiffany's house and went through like all of her things. And I was able to find all of their love letters from the very beginning. And I only read one or two. It was an intense love from the very beginning, very codependent.
An intense love that began to flounder when the couple started a family.
She had just said that things seemed different when she'd had their oldest child. He did not like the attention that she and the baby got.
He wanted 1,000% of her all the time. He'd even tell her, like, there'd be emails that she'd show me. I mean, he's even saying, like, if I can't have you, I don't want the kids. The kids, that didn't matter to him. It was her. It was having her. that's what he wanted.
2 more children came along, but Keland was determined to have Tiffany to himself. The move to Washington seems to have been part of that need.
She did mention that they moved a couple of times to get away from family, and that this was the biggest move to Washington State. She said it was to purposely get away from her family, to kind of isolate her from her family and friends.
One of the tactics in an abusive power and control relationship is this what's called divide and conquer, where you try to separate your partner, your potential victim, from their closest friends and family.
The move 2,000 miles away from Michigan was a bone of contention from the start.
He was offered a job out here, and Tiffany did not want to come out here. Her family was back there. She'd been working on her community back there, and Keland took the job, told them they were moving out here, and then left her there to pack.
What Tiffany said was he moved her out here to get her away from the support network that she had. But for him, it was all sunshine and daisies. You know, he moved out here to make a better life for the family.
Perhaps Keland didn't anticipate that his wife would immediately begin to build a new support network for herself and the children.
She was new, and it was like an instant thing. She kind of just started saddling up to me, and we just got to talking, and from that moment on, it was like we'd always known each other.
The couple fitted in fine with the community.
Turns out I did actually like her husband quite a bit. Him and I got along instantly. And we just became friends over that, you know.
Everybody loved Keland. Everybody that knew him liked him. He was vivacious. He was fun. He was, he was handsome. He could woo you in a minute. Like, he was just funny. You wanted to be around him.
He was extremely personable and kind of like made you feel at ease. Very hospitable and generous, and we kind of had like the same dark sense of humor, and so we got along really well.
Tiffany joined the Parent-Teacher Association at her children's elementary school and quickly gained a reputation as a generous, hard-working member of the team.
Staff appreciation, she went overboard. She did all of the decorations. She planned the whole thing. She made food.
She would do like a staff breakfast, to where she's up all night the night before, or she's up early that morning getting things ready and bringing things in, and they were super yummy. And the staff just gobbled it all up quickly.
At one point during her really rough patch, she was up until 2 a.m. making food for our staff, and she was crying because she said, it's not enough, I didn't do enough.
Before long, Tiffany's friends realized that it wasn't just at school that she was running herself ragged. She was working hard for her husband, Keland, too.
Tiffany, from the first day I met her, she was a single parent. And she did everything. Everything. She did every single meal, all of the cleaning, all the schoolwork, all the school activities, all the clothes shoppings, all the school things, everything. Tiffany did everything by herself. She never asked him for help, and he never offered help.
Another new friend, Rennie Sundby, president of the PTA, formed a poor first impression of Keland Hill.
He was in our PTA room, and he was sprawled out in the chair, and we were working on carnival. So that's, we have games and a bouncy house and balloon animals for all our kids. And we are frantically prepping for carnival. All of our spouses are helping, and he's sitting in the room, completely laid back with a smile on his face, like he was a lot. Just, he was the guy, and I didn't remember until later, that was my first reaction to him, was I actually took a step backwards. And I thought to myself, why are you in here? Why aren't you helping us? Because most people would. Your wife is out there working, you get up and you help.
Tiffany was hardworking, generous, but her friends noted that for her husband, whatever she did was never enough.
The marriage wasn't the way he wanted it to be. He wanted, like, a 50s style marriage where the woman stayed home and cooked and did what he said. But Tiffany was an independent spirit, and she was extremely active in her children's education and was volunteering all the time for everything. I mean, she just gave of herself constantly. And so he'd be upset that she wasn't at home doing the dishes or cleaning the house or have dinner ready because she was so busy volunteering all the time.
You could tell there wasn't a closeness that you can see in a lot of marriages. There weren't like the little touches, the hand holdings. There weren't things like that. And I always saw that from the very beginning. Whenever he'd enter a room at any time, she would automatically like stiffen. Like her shoulders would kind of go up a little bit. She was no longer that relaxed talking. He'd come in the room and she automatically would start like tending to him, like what he needed to do, and like take orders from him.
The Hills' new circle of friends sensed that the couple's marriage was not perfect. They had no idea just how badly Keland treated Tiffany behind closed doors.
He was a terrorist. He terrorized her.
And he did it in front of the children, who one night sent out anxious text messages.
I got a text message, help, help, help.
When Keland Hill had made his wife move away from her family, it was just step one in an escalating pattern of torment sometimes witnessed by friends and neighbors. Things were not happy inside the Keland Hill household.
I never saw any physical behavior, the way he talked to her. You know, once he got really comfortable around us, it wasn't behavior of a good spouse. Kind of degrading things, like if she, you know, wore a nice outfit or something, he would just say, you know, talk down to her and, oh, what do you think, you're so hot you can wear stuff like that? And
that was his public behavior. In private, it was far worse.
She was tired because he also was sleep depriving her. When she would sleep, he would turn on the TV as loud in their bedroom. He'd put water all over her side of the bed, so when she'd get into bed, it would be soaking wet.
She told me that he would keep her awake for hours, if not days at a time, just to kind of play with the mental side of it, and kind of slapped her around several times, sometimes in front of the kids.
Keland was good. He would never show anything in front of anybody. That's why you could never believe that this was happening. But he would do little things when I was there. It's like he'd come in through the front door from being at work after Tiffany hadn't slept for however many weeks in a row. You know, she wasn't eating. She was just a wreck. And he'd come in, and if she was just talking to the kids and doing homework, he'd automatically be like, oh, no hug for me. You know, he wanted more of that attention.
Once he got comfortable with me, he started speaking more freely. Of course, it was his version of the story, so my wife, we tell each other everything. And so she would tell me things about their relationship that Tiffany had told her. And then I would hear his side of the story, but I wouldn't tell him that I knew those things. I'd keep that to myself.
The troubling version of events that Tiffany was telling Karina Knight didn't match the stories Keland was telling his new buddy, Isaiah Knight.
My own opinion, I had to be careful because I knew all of their deep, dark secrets, everything terrible that he was doing to her, and the torment that was going on in their marriage. But I knew that if I let on to him that I knew what was going on, he would take it out on her. I have to present, a false persona, basically, to him. I have to pretend like I'm still his brother, I'm still his friend, to protect Tiffany.
As soon as I think he realized that Tiffany was confiding in me is when he started changing with me.
It was a problem Tiffany recognized only too well. Keland would realize that she had someone to confide in and set about splitting them up.
She's like, he's starting. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, he's starting to try to make me doubt my friendship with you.
I call it schmoozing. Kind of schmoozing over and making sure everyone is on his side, and that she seems crazy to think about these different things that are going on. That it's all in her head. It's nothing big, it's nothing real.
Of course, I wanted her to leave the very first time she told me this was going on. But he'd find her no matter what she did or where she went. That was her thing. She's like, he'll find me. He will find a way to me. He will break apart every friendship and relationship that I have, and I will have to go back to him. Because she'd always forgiven him. She'd always let him come back, accepted his apologies, and he always went back to doing the same.
In late summer 2019, Keland did something that Tiffany could no longer keep from her friends and neighbors.
We were supposed to have our first official PTA meeting at the school. And she had texted me and said, I don't know if I'll be there tonight, I have a concussion. All I could think of was, she must have gotten in a car accident. Because for me, in my life, I had never been around, at least knowingly, someone who was in a domestic violence situation.
September 11th, 2019, Keland gets angry and goes after Tiffany. He throws her into a wall. He chases her down a flight of stairs. She tries to call 911. She's terrified. He slaps the phone out of her hand.
I got a text message, help, help, help.
One of their children asked Google or whatever, Amazon Echo, that they had to call someone.
They sent you a text message that said help and that mom and dad were fighting?
They said help, help, help. They were crying. They were saying that something happened, they're fighting.
Okay.
We're scared. We're scared.
They told her what was happening, and she called 911 from a different state because he had taken her phone, so she couldn't call 911.
Did you hear any yelling in the background or anything like that?
They were yelling help.
Tiffany was injured so badly in this assault that she had gotten whiplash and a concussion and had to be seen by neurologists.
The police came and he was arrested. And that night she came to the meeting, and after the meeting, Karina, who was her best friend, came in with her and she was crying, and I said, are you okay? And Karina said, you tell her and you tell her now. She needs to know. And so Tiffany had said, my husband pushed me, my head hit the wall, I have a concussion, he's abusive.
Injured and in pain, her children having witnessed the frightening act of violence, Tiffany Hill was forced to confront the reality of her unhappy marriage.
Her kids were getting older and she was seeing, like, this is what they're gonna think is acceptable for them. You know, that this is how people get to treat them.
This time, she goes to police and she files on him. This time, Tiffany is not going to back down.
This was the first time that Tiffany's friends in Vancouver had heard a full account of the relentless abuse that she had suffered at Keland's hands. Abuse which began shortly after their wedding.
When they were living in the East Coast, and it was right after they both got out of the military. And I'm not quite sure all of the details, but basically in a drunken rage, he tried to choke the life out of her, literally. And she managed to get out of the house and got to a neighbor's house, and the police were called and he was arrested. Yeah, but eventually he got her to drop the charges.
Then she said they moved to Maryland, and he was abusive in Maryland. And she said, I would call 911 and the police would show up and they would say, well, you've been drinking, just go sleep it off in the basement. That's what they told him. They wouldn't arrest him. They just told him to go sleep in the basement.
Detective Tanya Woolstein was ready and waiting when Tiffany went to Vancouver's Domestic Violence Prosecution Centre to document the full history of her husband's abusive behaviour.
80% or so of domestic violence victims recant. They don't want to cooperate with investigations. They are in such a state of being manipulated and gaslighted and financially dependent, a number of other things. Tiffany had made that decision to break away. She was reporting. She was asking for help.
Tiffany explained that this is all a game to Keland, and he's threatened to kill her before, and to kill her or hurt her would mean nothing to him. It's all a game to him, and she felt like she'd be the one to lose.
What Tiffany and I talked about was a brief history of their relationship and then focused on what had been going on more recently.
The authorities decide that action is needed against the trained killer Keland Hill.
The day after the attack, Clark County officials issue a no-contact order against Keland Hill. In the paperwork that Tiffany fills out supporting this no contact order, she has written that if he were angry enough and drunk enough and he had a gun, he would use it on me and he would kill me.
Some victims, we do have great concerns about their safety, and Tiffany would be one. So I would say I have more contact with Tiffany than the average domestic violence victim, more along the lines of domestic violence victims who I am seriously concerned will be seriously harmed or murdered by their abuser.
Keland was served with the protection order and arrested. He was arrested for interfering with the report of domestic violence and assault.
Keland was released on bail. The no-contact order barred him from going within 250 feet of his wife and from contacting her in person or by phone. He was also banned from buying or possessing a gun. Would this be enough to protect Mrs. Hill from her angry, controlling husband?
Especially after he had the restraining orders and after he'd been out of jail, he was showing me the dark side. He had a seriously bad evil in him.
They had met, married, and had 3 children. But by September 2019, it seemed that Tiffany Hill's husband, Keland, had murder on his mind. Keland Hill may have been arrested in order to stay away from his wife, but the former Marine was not in a mood to obey orders.
Keland was released on bail after his arrest, and he almost immediately began to violate the protection order.
He began making inquiries, trying to work out where Tiffany would be and when she would be there.
One of the things that Keland did after the protection order was he went to the bowling alley and tried to get coaching for his daughter. And he asked the folks at the bowling alley, would Tiffany be present while her daughter was being instructed?
Several days later, Tiffany receives a FaceTime call from Keland. She doesn't answer it. He later claims that, it was an accident. But it continues. One violation after another.
Minor transgressions on the face of it, but former homicide detective Rod Demery believes they speak volumes about Keland Hill's attitude.
When someone is made so many different violations of a protection order, then it's clear that they have no intention on ever following that protection order. Probably after the first violation, certainly the second violation, some steps should be taken.
He was still texting her every day, sending her Facebook messages all the way through October.
On October 6th, a phone call that devastated Tiffany.
We have an assembly at the school. She gets a phone call. She comes back out of the room that she was in. She looked like a ghost. And I said, what's going on? And she said, I have to go meet my social worker. He tried to buy a gun.
He went to Walmart and tried to purchase a bolt-action rifle to take care of a varmint inside his home.
That is the day that I think her soul died. She was just a shell of a human. She was so devastated that he had tried to buy a gun and what that was going to mean to her.
As he tried to purchase this weapon, the background check was completed, and it showed up that he had been charged with domestic abuse and had a protected order against him. Background checks are linked through all law enforcement systems. It's almost real time. So if someone's attempting to buy a weapon and they have a protection from abuse order or something like that, the jurisdiction that issued it is almost immediately notified. The theory behind it is to catch someone in the act, because it is illegal to attempt to purchase a weapon knowing that you have a protection from abuse order against you.
Sheriff's deputy shows up at the scene and talks to Keland, and Keland's real calm. That deputy then reports it to the Clark County officials in Washington State.
The following day, a warrant was issued for Keland Hill's arrest, but by then, no longer living in the family home, deputies struggled to locate him.
He said he stayed at a friend's house, his other friend, who lived half hour, 45 minutes from their house. And he would also say things like he's living in his car, by the river, But he would just say things, you know, I don't know if it had any truth to them whatsoever. He had so much untruthfulness about him. He would just say whatever he had to.
So he's not arrested, nothing happens, and he's still out there.
5 weeks would pass before police could take him into custody. In the meantime, everyone around Tiffany did what they could to keep her safe.
We did plan on, here are the things that we need to do to try to keep you safe, because we know that he's out there trying to purchase firearm. We talked about calling 911 immediately and leaving the area immediately, and many other things.
We'd been practicing lockdowns at the school. They were prepared. There were, you know, security guards at the school every day.
I believe they sent his picture to all the staff members. And, you know, this person is, because there's a restraining order, he could have came and got the kids out of school because the restraining order wasn't based at the children. It was on her, but she was always there.
If Keland showed up, doors locked. They hit the button, classrooms lock, everything locks. Whenever we'd go to somewhere, I would go somewhere first, take a look around, make sure he wasn't there, and then she'd come behind me. You know, if we went out to lunch, I'd go in first, let her know, okay, you're good, and then she could come in. And can you imagine, like, what a way to live?
I think the hardest part for me was being at the school and walking out to my car with Tiffany and the kids, because I never tried to let her walk out by herself. But having to tell my 10-year-old, if you see the kids' dad and I tell you to run, I want you to run and I want you to hide, and I don't want you to come find me. I don't want you to look back. I don't want you to come for me. I want you to find a safe place.
Just a few days after Keland's shopping trip to Oregon, another breach of the restraining order.
On October 10th, 2019, Keland shows up at the Peachtree restaurant where, coincidentally, Tiffany Hill is there.
We have just a board meeting at a restaurant here in Vancouver, and we're all leaving, and I see this man walking up, and he smiles at me. And I think to myself, well, that looks like Keland. And I said, oh, he's not supposed to be here. He can't be here. And I hear Tiffany say, oh my God, and she starts running for the car. Keland's yelling at her, I just want to see my kids. And then realizes, you know, we're all coming towards him, like this is going to be us forming a circle right around her. And he runs.
Sheriff deputies were called to the Peachtree restaurant, and when they arrived, he had already left.
For another 4 weeks, Keland Hill remained a free man, free to continue terrorizing his wife, free to keep turning up wherever she might be, in restaurants, at the grocery store, at the school. How was he doing it? On November 7th, the support group and Tiffany made a breakthrough of sorts.
Tiffany reports that Keland keeps showing up at all kinds of locations where she is. Wherever she is, he just seems to be there. She tells police. Police go to talk to Keland. They find him at a bowling alley. He appears to be trying to delete an app on his phone.
Why would Keland want to hide an app on his phone from the cops? All of a sudden, Tiffany's friends knew how Keland was able to keep showing up wherever she was.
I tell her, the only way for him to know that you're here, because we're parked in the very back, is he has to be following you or tracking you. That is the only way. The parking lot was all the way in the back. I mean, you would have never seen someone pull in and park.
We knew that he was somehow tracking her. We didn't know how. We didn't know if it was by her phone or if there was something on her car, but we knew that there was some way of him tracking her. We were pressing the officer to check the car. Check the car. There's no way that he would have known she was here unless he was tracking her.
Eventually, they searched Tiffany's vehicle, and beneath the wheel well of the vehicle was a small black box that was used as a GPS tracking device. At that point, Keland was arrested, taken into custody for stalking and violating his protective order. His vehicle and his cell phones were taken as evidence.
On November 8th, 2019, Tiffany Hill goes back to the prosecution center to report yet more violations of the domestic violence no contact order. And the Vancouver police decide, you know, they want to do a risk assessment
Tiffany was very concerned that Keland was going to murder her. We use a danger assessment that's essentially a lethality predictor for our victim. She scored very high on that, 31 out of 41, which is an extreme risk category for us. We were all very concerned about Tiffany's safety.
For now, Tiffany's extremely dangerous husband Keland was safely behind bars, but for how long? On November 21st, 2019, Keland Hill had a bail hearing.
The state believes that if the defendant is released, he will kill the victim.
The prosecutors argued to the judge, this man is dangerous. If he gets out, he will kill her. So they argue for Keland's bail to be raised from $75,000 to $2 million.
She had hired a lawyer for her to advocate for her, who told the judge, he will kill her. Tiffany is begging you, he will kill her. She had done all these things to help protect herself and to work within the system.
I stopped reporting because he's made aware of it if I report, and I'm scared of his anger and retaliation. Despite my non-report, he continued to escalate because he feels he's smarter than everybody else and he's untouchable.
In a statement read out in court, Tiffany tried to explain the fear and threat that she had lived under every day.
He is here now because he placed a tracking device on my vehicle and tried to possess a weapon. Those two things are major indicators of what I've known all along, deep down, that he's going to kill me if he's given the opportunity. I beg you to not allow him to get to me and my children. We have no family here, nowhere to go. We have no money and nowhere to hide from him. He's made sure of that. Thank you.
Following Supreme Court bail guidelines, Keland Hill was released.
The judge looks at the records and he says, well, I don't know. I mean, this guy, you know, he doesn't have a criminal history because, of course, he has forced Tiffany to drop all the charges, including attempted murder. He has a job. He's gainfully employed. He's not a flight risk. He has served in the military honorably. And then the prosecutor argues, well, if you're going to not raise the bail, then at least put an electronic tracker on him. And the judge says, no, I don't think so.
For a period of a month, he had violated domestic violence orders, the protection orders, 64 times that we know of.
Washington State Senator Linda Wilson, who campaigns to protect domestic violence victims, thinks that tracking perpetrators is essential to stopping them. She's fought for a law to better monitor abusers.
The gist of it is for victims of domestic violence that can get electronic monitoring on their abuser, this bill will create a real-time notification of this electronic monitoring, so 24/7, and then if the abuser gets too close, then they will get an alert on their phone through an app.
For Tiffany Hill, there was no such protection.
Keland Hill is released on bail, $250,000 bail, meaning he only had to post $2,500.
Would putting Keland Hill back on the streets be shown to be a mistake?
We heard the tones that initially sounded like perhaps a school shooting. It came out rather quickly that this wasn't like an active shooter situation.
Vancouver, Washington, November 26, 2019. Tiffany Hill's mother had arrived from New York to support her daughter.
That afternoon, Keland Hill drives to Sarah J. Anderson Elementary School, the school where he knows that his wife will soon be arriving to pick up their 3 children.
He must have been parked in such a way that he could see Tiffany's car, so he could see when she came out.
He was there in the lot for approximately 20 minutes talking on the phone with his mother. After the 20 minutes, he pulled out of his parking spot, pulled up in front of Tiffany's vehicle. So he was parked kind of perpendicular to her vehicle, got out of the vehicle, stood in front on the driver's side, shot several times through the driver's side window. And then had some kind of a malfunction with his firearm, it appears. Went back to his car trunk and appeared to kind of reload or clear his malfunction, came to the side of the driver's side and fired a couple additional rounds, then got into his car and fled.
The fact that you would fire inside a vehicle There are all sorts of dangers, ricochet, pass through. Oh God, it's numerous. Firing a firearm in any small space is a dangerous undertaking.
Also in the car, Tiffany's mother.
Tiffany's mom was shot trying to protect her. Tiffany's mom leaned over and did the thing that they do, you know, just the instinctual reaching out to try to protect her daughter. And she was shot in her arms and her hands several times. Clark County deputies were actually executing a warrant just a few blocks away. So when the call came out, they left the scene of the warrant, and I believe he probably heard the sirens. So they were right on him as he was leaving. Keland's first objective and his primary objective was to kill Tiffany, and then secondarily, he perhaps would have focused on others. And perhaps if Clark County hadn't been so close and he had more time, we don't know what he would have done. So I'm certainly grateful that they were there, because I believe they saved those children's lives.
Once first responders get to a school and there's been a shooting like that, immediately the school's going to be on lockdown. There's going to be a perimeter set around the school, and a search is going to begin.
I just heard part of the lockdown procedure go into place, and I wasn't quite sure, like, is this real or not real?
So I was at work at the Domestic Violence Prosecution Center. So we heard the tones that initially sounded like perhaps the school shooting. So we all began gearing up and getting ready to leave. It came out rather quickly that this wasn't like an active shooter situation. And then they mentioned Tiffany's name on the air, and that's when I knew it was Tiffany. It was devastating. I mean, I remember just yelling to Prosecutor Boyd across the office, "It's Tiffany, it's Tiffany." And just feeling so terrible.
As one set of first responders rushed to help Tiffany and her mother, another was on the tail of the fleeing Keland Hill.
Keland was located, and he led police on a high-speed chase, speeds up to 75 miles per hour on busy streets. In a situation such as a fleeing person in a very populated area or dangerous area, one has to decide which one would cause the less amount of damage, letting this person run free or pursuing them. But if the police officers pursued, or the first responders pursued Keland, it was because they thought he was a higher risk by fleeing with a firearm. He was a danger. He was a danger to himself, and he was a clear danger to other people.
The deputies actually attempted to stop his vehicle by ramming it with theirs and pursued him until he got caught in traffic, and that's when Keland exited the vehicle, turned to face the oncoming officers, and shot himself.
A marriage forged in war had ended in the death of Mr. Keland Hill and his wife Tiffany. In the meantime, word was starting to get out. There had been an incident at the school.
I had just gotten home from work. All of a sudden, her phone just started blowing up. You know, "Karina, have you heard what? There's a shooting at the school. It's Tiffany."
I had just turned on my phone and it was already on Facebook, and it said school shooting, and I knew instantly. I called her phone first, I called the school, and then about 3 minutes later, the school called me. And they said, "You need to get here. The kids are waiting for you. They know you're coming."
Someone actually called me and told me about an hour later, "Yep, it was Tiffany. They're not telling us if she's gone or not. But, you know, I think she is." I have friends who were in the medical community, so I texted and said he shot her and he killed her, and rumor has it he shot himself. And she texted me back and said, "Yeah, he's gone."
Tiffany and her mother were both taken to the hospital. Tiffany was pronounced dead on arrival, and her mother miraculously survived.
We immediately left our 3 kids with our neighbor. We booked it down to the school. We had to be cleared before we could go in.
When we went in there, the kids had no idea what was going on. They saw their mother get shot, but they didn't know she was dead. We were with the children when when the sheriff told them that their father had killed their mother and then killed himself.
The shocking crime was reported widely. Senator Linda Wilson became even more determined to push forward her bill to protect domestic abuse victims.
Well, I was watching television and I saw the police report on the news. And of course, when I saw that, it broke my heart because I witnessed domestic violence as a child pretty consistently.
Senator Wilson contacted Karina and had said, you know, I'd really like to use Tiffany's name for this act we're trying to pass to become a law. And then with our testimony, you know, our personal experience and what we knew, it went from there. And it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't going to stop.
I told them that I would like to honor Tiffany in a way that would help others.
I think it's an important piece of legislation, and I think that at the very best it can save lives, and at the very least maybe give the victims of domestic violence control and some feeling of peace in their lives.
Wilson believes being able to track their abusers' movements is essential to protecting victims.
Had this technology been around, then, and Tiffany had been available to it, she would have known more often when he was lurking, because she would be notified on her phone or her watch. Then they would get a real-time notification. So as soon as that happened, then they would be notified that this person was within their geoprotection zone. So many times with domestic violence victims, it's the element of surprise that takes them off guard.
Washington state lawmakers passed the Tiffany Hill Act in 2020.
All those in favor of adoption of the proposed substitute, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The proposed substitute is adopted.
Her friends believe it will protect more women like Tiffany, not only in Washington, but across the USA, which is exactly what Tiffany would have wanted.
She loved God. She loved people. She would give you the shirt off of her back. She loved her kids, her community. She worked really hard at building a community. She knew how important it was. She knew it takes a village.
Tiffany Hill is gone, but because of her, the domestic violence victims will be safer in our state, and Tiffany really will continue to serve in a different way.
Tiffany and Keland Hill were married in 2008. Keland murdered Tiffany in November 2019, moments before taking his own life. In April 2020, the Tiffany Hill Act to protect victims of abuse was signed into law.